All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Adrienne Wu. I'm a program manager at GTI and the host of our cultural policy podcast, Taiwan Salon. Before we start the event, I just want to also give a little introduction of GTI and our organization, as well as the work that we do. So the Global Taiwan Institute is a 501c3 think tank dedicated to insightful, cutting-edge research and inclusive research on policy issues regarding Taiwan and the world. So our mission is to enhance the relationship between Taiwan and other countries, especially the United States, through policy research and programs that promote better public understanding about Taiwan and its people. So to realize the vision and mission of GTI, we have a number of different programs. One of our main programs is our biweekly publication, so the Global Taiwan Brief. We also have a number of occasional reports. We also have 3 podcasts. Like I said, I'm the host of one of the podcasts, Taiwan Salon, but we also have 2 other podcasts, Taiwan Security Review, as well as GTI Insights. And of course, we also have our public seminars, and that is one of the events that we are doing today. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. And I'd also like to thank the staff and interns for making this event possible, as well as the board and our advisors for their support in our programs. So our event today is Strengthening Taiwan's International Ties, Perspectives from TUPP 2024. So I'll let Bonnie talk a little bit about TUPP later on, so I won't go too much into it. But just to give you a summary of the event, so following the Democratic Progressive Party's victory in the 2024 Taiwan presidential election, Taiwan faces even greater pressure from China in regards to its international space and security. As a new administration comes into the office, it will be important for Taiwan to continue to build its resiliency through ties, both formal and informal, with its like-minded partners and to bolster Taiwan's own civil defense capabilities. So we have a great panel here to provide us with different perspectives on all of these issues. So one unique factor about the TUPP program is that it is perspectives from people who are experts in their own fields, but may not be as well-knowledge in Taiwan. So they kind of come in with an outside perspective. And I think that allows us with a lot of fresh new perspectives to the Taiwan policy field. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentations from the panelists today. So we will do more lengthy introductions for each panelist before each of their presentations, but I will just list everyone's name now. So today we are joined by, of course, GMF's Managing Director, Bonnie Glaser, as our co-moderator. And then the panelists that are the participants of the 2024 TUPP program are Elisa Baczulska, so from the European Council on Foreign Relations, Leland Lazarus, Florida International University, Teresa Winter from Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and Brian Volsky, who is from the Foreign Policy for America. Apologies if I butchered anyone's name, I'm so sorry. So they'll be presenting on their papers that they wrote as part of the TUPP program, and these papers will be released early next month. So I hope that everyone can look forward to those papers. And my own paper is also included that, just a little bit of a self-plug here. So just an overall run of show. So we'll start with remarks by Bonnie about the TUPP program, which will last about 5 to 10 minutes. Then the panelists will present. Then we will have some moderator questions, and we'll also open it up to questions for the panelists to talk amongst each other, and then we'll open it to questions from the audience. So please feel free to send in your questions either by tweeting us or in the YouTube chat, or you can send it to contact@globaltaiwan.org. All right, so with all of that event stuff out of the way, I'll now go to Bonnie's introduction. So Bonnie Glaser is the Managing Director of German Marshall Fund's Indo-Pacific Program. She is also a non-resident fellow with the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Australia, and a senior associate with the Pacific Forum. She was also previously senior advisor for Asia and the director of the China Power Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So thank you so much for joining us, Bonnie, and yeah, take it away.
Well, thank you, Adrian, and thanks to all of you out there who are watching, and to all of our panelists for joining. The United States and Europe increasingly recognize that Taiwan's vibrant and successful democracy is under threat from the People's Republic of China. And Taiwan has received very high marks for its democracy, for protecting political rights and holding free and fair elections. The most recent, of course, was held this past January. Taiwan's democratic achievements are really even more impressive when set against the backdrop of a deterioration in freedom and democracy worldwide. Like other industrialized democracies, Taiwan faces a multitude of challenges that are especially difficult to address in the face of Beijing's efforts that prevent Taiwan's government and its people, its NGOs, from interacting with the world. And Taiwan's exclusion from international organization also hampers the world's ability to develop effective solutions to myriad problems. So the TUPP program, the Taiwan-US Policy Program, was launched in 2017 to encourage young professionals from at the beginning, just from the United States, to include Taiwan in their research and help Taipei expand its global networks. In 2022, the TUPP program was expanded after I joined the German Marshall Fund to include young professionals from Europe in support of GMF's mission of promoting transatlantic cooperation. TUPP enables future leaders to acquire a deeper understanding of Taiwan and its relations with the United States through meetings with officials and experts in Washington, D.C. And that is then followed by a visit to Taiwan to gain firsthand exposure to Taiwan's politics, its culture, its histories, and of course, its strengths. Experiencing Taiwan influences how these future leaders approach their work and their writing. It impacts their worldview by imbuing them with an appreciation for Taiwan's history and its commitment to principles of democracy and human rights that undergird the existing international order. And it also reinforces the importance of maintaining robust bilateral relations and strengthening international support for maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, which is an enduring interest of many countries in the world, certainly in Europe and certainly the United States. So the 2024 TUPP cohort traveled to Taiwan after spending 3-4 days in Washington, D.C. This past February. They had an intense week of meetings and activities, and each participant gained insights into Taiwan and its role in their respective fields. This year's delegation comprised 5 Americans and 5 Europeans, and over time, TUPP seeks to create a body of global experts with firsthand knowledge of Taiwan who support sustaining and expanding Taiwan's international ties. So I'm very grateful to the funders of this program, which include the Henry Luce Foundation, the Global Taiwan Institute, and the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. So with that, I am very eager to hear from some of our participants from the 2024 TUPP cohort. They have all written fantastic papers, which, as Adrian said, will be published probably in about 2 weeks, and they will be made available on the GMF website. So, Adrian, am I turning the floor back to you?
Yes, thank you so much for giving us such a great overview of the program and outlining all of its goals. So we'll first turn to Brian Volsky. So Brian Volsky is the Senior Diplomacy Advisor at Foreign Policy for America, where he leads the organization's work to strengthen and modernize American diplomacy. He has over a decade of U.S. government experience, including working for the Department of State as a senior investigative counsel in the Office of Inspector General and working as an attorney at the Department of Commerce, where he advised on export control and sanctions law. Brian will present his paper, A Partner for Democracy, 3 Ways to Expand Taiwan's Role in Advancing Democracy and Human Rights Around the World, which details how the United States can build upon Taiwan's strong commitment to democracy and human rights to enhance existing partnerships. Please feel free to speak, Brian.
Great. Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you to the Global Taiwan Institute for putting this on. Thank you so much to Bonnie for leading this program and leading our delegation. It was a transformative experience, I think, for all of us, and it was incredibly valuable. So anyone here considering the program, definitely apply. As Adrienne said, I am the Senior Diplomacy Advisor for an organization called Foreign Policy for America, which is a U.S. nonprofit that advocates for principled U.S. engagement in the world and diplomacy first foreign policy. My job in this organization is to find ways to strengthen America's capacity to engage in diplomacy and to advocate for policies that advance diplomacy or democracy and human rights worldwide. So as Bonnie said, Taiwan is an incredibly robust democracy with a strong civil society and greatly values human rights of all types. And so I had not primarily focused on Taiwan in my work up to this point. So going into this program, I was immediately attracted to learning about the incredible success story that Taiwan had in terms of transitioning from a dynastic and one-party rule system to a very robust democracy. And so that was a point that was touched on all throughout our trip. And it was clearly something that everyone in Taiwan valued and wanted to share with the world their experience and expertise in these issues. And so I was interested in looking at how the United States considered that aspect of Taiwan and how the United States could incorporate Taiwan in its own work in promoting democracy and human rights around the world. And what we found was, and as Bonnie explained, there are a number of challenges for Taiwan to participate meaningfully in the world and on the international stage, particularly in UN-related fora, but that the United States has and continues to promote Taiwan where possible. And so what I found was the United States is already doing this work, and we should just find ways to encourage it to do more. And so I came up with 3 fairly simple, easy ways for the United States to try to improve Taiwan's meaningful participation in advancing democracy and global human rights around the world. So the first was to try to increase Taiwan's participation in the Summit for Democracy. This is a series of summits that have been created during the Biden administration, bringing together a number of governments and civil society actors who work on strengthening democracy, protecting it against authoritarianism, against technological challenges, and against our own internal issues that all democracies struggle with. And Taiwan has participated in these summits, albeit in a somewhat more limited fashion compared to other entities. You had most recently in March of 2024, the 3rd summit take place in South Korea. The digital minister of Taiwan attended, but only virtually, and it was a pre-recorded message. It was not a in-person panel discussion like most other organizations or countries that were participating. And now there's news reporting indicating that there are some issues with South Korea wanting to potentially invite Taiwan, but having challenges with the PRC pushing back. After the digital minister's participation, the PRC did protest her involvement, despite it being very minor. And that just goes to show you the pressure that countries face in trying to bring in Taiwan. So the US is no doubt pushing for Taiwan's participation. It has to do it somewhat quietly in these fora. But I just think that the US government should make sure that this is a higher level focus for officials to try to encourage Taiwan to be involved, given the expertise that Taiwan has specifically on democracy, on youth engagement, countering disinformation. Second, more fundamentally, I think the U.S. should strengthen the global, the GCTF, the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, which was a program created in 2015 by the United States and Taiwan through the American Institute in Taiwan, the AIT for the United States. And it was the idea was that it was to bring together a series of workshops related to a number of issues in which Taiwan had expertise, including democracy, human rights, rule of law, and work with other countries around the world, primarily through workshops in Taiwan, bringing together both government and civil sector actors to talk about these issues, share ideas, best practices. Since its creation in 2015, it's grown massively in scope. There's been over 74 workshops and events with more than 8,000 participants. Over 128 countries have participated. And since the creation in 2015, we have Australia and Japan formally signing on as partners to the GCTF. So it's greatly expanded. There's a huge demand, I think, from individuals who want to participate. It's not a UN-based program, so it allows for Taiwan to be more involved and to bring in some of their government officials. So in April 2024, for example, Canada hosted an event on democratic resilience against disinformation, in which it brought the chief prosecutor of the Ministry of Justice from Taiwan to participate. So that's one example of the type of workshops that the GCTF does. Congress and the United States Congress is very supportive of this program. It funds it to the tune of about $4 million, almost to the point where AIT struggles to put on enough programming to meet the demands, both of the participants as well as the Congress. And so my recommendation is that Congress consider creating a dedicated fund for GCTF programming to come out of the State Department's headquarters here in DC to create an expansion of what's called the franchise model, where these events can take place outside of Taiwan and can be put on by diplomatic posts and embassies all around the world. And then finally, I recommend that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, work with its counterpart in Taiwan, the International Cooperation and Development Fund, to strengthen the ICDF's democracy-focused development programs. Historically, the ICDF has not focused so much on the rule of law, good government, civil society issues. It's been more focused on technical assistance, lending, humanitarian assistance. That's in contrast to USAID, that has a very robust democracy and governance section. It has a Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. It has a policy on incorporating democratic principles into all development programs to ensure that development does not hinder democracy in these countries where the aid is going. So there are ways that USAID could provide its own expertise to strengthen ICDF's work in this space, which would unlock the ability for the two organizations to further collaborate in these spaces. So those are just a couple of ways that the U.S. can improve upon the work it's already doing. Of course, there's a number of challenges, but again, this was a great experience to learn about what's being done and to find ways for further collaboration.
Fantastic, Brian. Thank you so much. We're going to move to our next speaker, who is Alicia Bolchowska, she is a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, she is based in the Warsaw office of ECFR. And prior to joining ECFR, she worked for over 6 years as a China analyst at the Asia Research Center, which is the think tank based at the War Studies University in Warsaw. Alicia's paper is on the title of it is Managing Expectations, How to Make Taiwan, Central and Eastern Europe Relations More Sustainable. And it focuses on how both the CEE and Taiwan can engage in ways that are mutually productive. So over to you, Alicia.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. I enjoyed TUPP program tremendously. And it's a great privilege to be here and to be able to share my paper with you. So as Bonnie said, I think that, there is a conventional wisdom when it comes to Taiwan, Central and Eastern European relations. For quite a few years now, many people have argued, and we've seen a lot of developments on the front of developing ties and cooperation between CEE and Taiwan. But I think that what is really needed is to understand the complexity of the regional interests between different CE countries and the way Taiwan also perceives the region. And for some of the American listeners who might not be that familiar with European geography, I would just like to make a disclaimer that Central and Eastern Europe is a very contested term. It's a region that spans from the Baltic states in the north through Visegrad 4 countries in Central Europe that actually really don't like being called Eastern European countries. Then you have Western Balkans, and many of these countries in the Western Balkans are not part of the European Union. So these are very different countries with different economic setups, legal setups. They have very diverging historical perspectives on, for example, cooperation with Russia, which is now one of the key issues also in relation to Taiwan. So that's just a disclaimer for you to understand that when we talk about CEE, we're actually talking about almost 20 very different countries that have very diverging perspectives on both China and Taiwan. But as I said, the conventional wisdom is that the region has been the engine of growth behind the development of cooperation with Taiwan. And this trend predates the war in Ukraine. Although Russia's aggression was the tipping point that dramatically changed the security calculus of many CE countries. And now China is increasingly seen as a security actor supporting Russia's interests, especially in terms of rebuilding regional security architecture in line with Moscow's interests. And that's why this solidarity building with Taiwan comes into picture as an element of strengthening some CEE countries' own security. So we're witnessing this movement where the region looks far beyond its own neighborhood to understand security in much broader terms. And we're also seeing this trend where some people, especially in the security community, are looking at what we call as the two theaters of war merging. So with this whole idea of the situation in the Indo-Pacific also having a role on the security of NATO's eastern flank. Lithuania and Czechia are the two countries at the forefront of these efforts. And maybe you remember a few years back, coercion against Lithuania was probably one of the topics that was making the headlines all around the world. And China's behavior towards this European country back then was also giving this new impetus to speed up the EU-wide efforts to prepare and create tools to fight China's coercion. That's how the anti-coercion instrument was born, and now how it's actually an instrument that forms part of this toolkit that the EU has in dealing with China. And there are at least 3 dimensions where Taiwan is seen among CEE countries as a very important partner. First of all, as I said, Taiwan is now a strategic partner. It's a partner to exchange knowledge. It's a partner to exchange perspectives on the impact of China-Russia cooperation against the backdrop of these two theaters merging, or the one actual theater and a very contentious potential theater in the Indo-Pacific. It's also an economic partner, so a very attractive partner when it comes to developing cooperation and attracting investment in cutting-edge technologies, especially in the semiconductor industry. And thirdly, Taiwan is also seen as a very creative partner in fighting disinformation. And we're seeing convergencies between Chinese and Russian disinformation, but the local context in Taiwan, in Central and Eastern Europe, is quite different. And that's very useful to actually compare how these converging strategies play out in different contexts. So again, knowledge sharing, situational awareness, Lithuania and Czechia at the forefront of these developments. And not to make the picture too rosy, I will now turn to some of the fissures and some of the crises that we are seeing. I wouldn't maybe call them crisis, but some problems that might affect, or developments and trends that might affect Taiwan CEE cooperation in the future. So one that we really should not underestimate is the domestic dynamics in different CE countries. We are seeing a very clear trend towards polarization and the rise of the alt-right in many countries. And although Poland was one of the successful democracies where this democratic backsliding was recently stopped, nevertheless, I think that there are quite a few powerful actors and people who think that cooperation with Taiwan is not necessarily something that is that important on the agenda. Slovakia is also a very good example where Fico is a political figure who is extremely pro-Chinese and pro-Russian at the same time, and cooperation with Taiwan will be affected by his role as well. Lithuania, although it has been this engine of growth between CE and Taiwan cooperation, there are some domestically there will be elections in Lithuania, and people who are associated with this renaissance of Taiwan-Lithuania cooperation are also quite polarizing as figures. They're not the most liked politicians for sure. The business community is also experiencing and expressing some discontent towards some of the outcomes of what we're seeing. So we have to be very aware that we have to mitigate this kind of narratives and perspectives and be able to respond by promoting narratives and arguments that counter the side effects of these trends, or at least we have to prepare for an environment where cooperation with Taiwan will be a little bit more problematic. European parliamentary elections might play a role here, but not to such an extent, I think, because in the end, the new European Parliament will most probably follow the previous one's consensus on cooperating with Taiwan. So to wrap it up, I think that we've experienced a lot of positive trends when it comes to cooperation between CEE countries and Taiwan, and we have to keep this momentum going. But these broader disruptive trends that also go back to domestic dynamics are very important to be observed and monitored and fought against at the level of the public debate, but also when it comes to actual policy making. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Elisa, for going into that. And, I think that, after seeing how much support there was from Lithuania for Taiwan, it's really good to get an update on what is actually happening on the ground and what some of the pitfalls are. So, thank you so much. So we're now going to turn to Leland Lazarus. So Leland Lazarus is the Associate Director of National Security at Florida International University's Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy, and he also leads a research team on U.S.-China national security issues in Latin America and the Caribbean. So prior to his current position, Leland has served as Special Assistant at U.S. Southern Command and at a State Department Foreign Service Officer, and he was also a State Department Foreign Service Officer in China and the Caribbean. So drawing upon his experience with Latin American relations, Leland will present his paper, Taiwan's Troubles in the Tropics, the Island's Allies in Latin America and the Caribbean Offer Challenges and Opportunities, which outlines recommendations for how Taiwan and the United States can work together to protect Taiwan's diplomatic allies in the region, as well as build up some informal ties as well. So Leland, I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Well, first and foremost, Adrian, thank you so much for organizing this, and Alicia, Teresa, Brian, it's a huge honor to see you guys again. Can't believe almost 4 months have passed since our time in Taiwan. We had such a great life-changing experience. And of course, Bonnie, thank you so much for your leadership, for starting this TUPP program. Thank you for the opportunity for us to do it. Now, just like what Adrian had mentioned, my background is China and Taiwan's relations in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so during the trip to Taiwan, I sort of used that lens in order to get a sense of Taiwan's priorities in the region. How is it changing? Which are some of the countries that Taiwanese officials are sort of most concerned about in terms of making the next switch? And then, of course, what are some policy recommendations for both Taiwan and the US in order to bolster partners in Latin America and the Caribbean? But I first want to start off by saying that just one day after Lai Ching-te won the Taiwan presidential election in January, the South Pacific island of Nauru switched its diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. And that reduced Taiwan's diplomatic allies worldwide down to just 12. And then of the 12, 7 of them are in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so you would think that since most of Taiwan's remaining allies are in the Western Hemisphere, that should really increase the region in terms of Taiwan's diplomatic priorities. And so I try to make the case that as the island continues to deepen its relations with key non-diplomatic partners like the US, the EU, Japan, Central and Eastern Europe, and then of course through the new southbound policy, Southeast Asia, it also needs to devote more resources to maintain its diplomatic allies that really advocate for Taiwan in international fora, like its Latin America and Caribbean partners. So in talking with both a representative from the Taiwan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, their Western Hemisphere department, and also a representative from their trade office, I ended up getting 2 different views on Taiwan's priorities in the region. First, I'm just going to go over some of the obvious top priorities, right? In addition to, of course, just maintaining the relations with the 7 diplomatic allies, that's Belize, Guatemala, Haiti, Paraguay, and then the 3 saints in the Eastern Caribbean, so St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There's also a much more practical reason to keep those kinds of allies. Having allies in the Western Hemisphere gives Taiwan's president a reason to transit through the United States to meet with that country's officials, right? Just like Tsai Ing-wen did en route to visiting Belize and Guatemala last year. But beyond that, Taiwan also has economic and cultural offices, or de facto embassies, if you will, in 9 non-diplomatic regional partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. And they're working to cultivate relations with members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, right, the CPTPP. That's Chile, that's Mexico, and that's Peru, in order to persuade them to support Taiwan's ascension into that pact as well. And Taiwan also engages in various regional multilateral fora in the region, like the Central American Bank of Economic Integration and the Central American Integration System. Now, Taiwan relies on really 4 major government and non-government agencies in order to carry out its foreign policy in the Americas. The first one, Brian already talked about, the ICDF, right, the International Cooperation and Development Fund, equivalent to our USAID. Some of the technical missions that they do in Latin America and the Caribbean includes helping goat farmers in Belize to manage their flocks, or donating tons of rice to Haiti, which is of course going through one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world right now. And of course, establishing small business programs for pregnant women and disabled citizens in Guatemala. But in addition to the ICDF, there's also another organization called the Overseas Investment and Development Corporation, or the OIDC. And that's similar to our US International Development Finance Corporation, or the DFC. It provides financing for key infrastructure projects in the diplomatic allies. An example of this is a $22 million hospital that was constructed in Guatemala during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And when President Tsai, when she visited Guatemala last year, she made it her business to attend or to visit that hospital because it saved hundreds of lives when Guatemala needed it the most. Another example is a $16 million hospital that Belize has just stood up. Now, of course, while the OIDC does not support projects on the same scale as the PRCs, billions of dollars for in infrastructure projects from the Belt and Road Initiative. These OIDC projects do consistently employ local workers, they employ local engineers, they provide local materials for the projects, and that's according to the diplomat from the Western Hemisphere Affairs Office. There's also the Taiwan Central American Trade Office, or CATO, which organizes specifically in Belize and in Guatemala various trade shows, investment delegations, tourism, public relations campaigns, in order to help Taiwanese and Central American businesses operate in each other's markets. And then finally, you have various Taiwanese NGOs, but specifically the most important one is the Tzu Chi Foundation, which offers support during natural disasters like the 2021 earthquake in Haiti and floods in rural Paraguay. So that's the positive. The negative was from a conversation with a trade representative who gave very mixed signals, right? So for example, he did say that some Taiwanese companies are operating in larger markets in, say, Mexico and Brazil. For example, Foxconn, right? Foxconn has a factory employing thousands in Sao Paulo, Brazil. There's been a delegation, a Taiwanese delegation to Mexico, which included Foxconn and Unimicron and Pegatron and others to look for investments in microchips, in information technology, and advanced manufacturing. So that's all positive spots. But other than that, most Taiwanese businesses really don't see the LAC market as attractive. Challenges include unpredictable domestic policies as leaders regularly dismantle the measures of their immediate predecessors, right? Or corruption and bribery that create headaches, as do complicated tax and labor laws. Also labor costs, right? One representative said to me that, why would a private company, say, pay for just marginally higher wages for workers in, say, Guatemala, when they can have a factory and pay just marginal lower wages in Southeast Asia, especially since it's closer geographically to Taiwan. And lastly, the relatively small domestic markets in Latin America and the Caribbean offer few opportunities for Taiwanese businesses to really scale their services. And so lastly, I ended with some policy recommendations for both the Taiwanese government and also Taiwanese businesses. The first is to significantly boost Taiwanese foreign investment, foreign assistance. According to the OEDC or the OECD, Taiwan spends just 0.039% of its GDP on foreign assistance. Let me just say that again, 0.039%. So if it increases that to just 1%, that would really allow the ICDF, the OIDC, and other entities to really support more big ticket development projects in diplomatic allies, right? Not just in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also elsewhere. 2, offer tax incentives for Taiwanese companies to set up businesses in Latin America and the Caribbean. Taiwan already has a precedent for this. It already offers generous tax credits to local and foreign companies that invest in industrial parks within Taiwan. I think it should consider offering tax incentives to some innovative companies to establish such parks in diplomatic allies. Third is to discuss with Washington about joining the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, or APEP. Those who focus on the Indo-Pacific, you guys know about IPEF, right? The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Well, the APEP is the Latin America Caribbean version of it. And one of the key components of APEP under the Biden administration is upskilling the region's workforce in semiconductor supply chains, in artificial intelligence, in 5G, and in cybersecurity. And of course, Taiwan is a global leader in all of those fields. and Taiwanese government agencies and companies can really play a meaningful role in that initiative, especially in Costa Rica and Panama, that are really carving out niches in the semiconductor nearshoring supply chain for the US. Fourth is to expand Cato's portfolio. As I mentioned before, Cato right now only focuses on trade promotion in Belize and Guatemala. Cato can absolutely expand its main mandate to include the other 5 diplomatic allies in the region. Fifth, consider expanding investment in other strategic Latin American and Caribbean countries. For example, the lithium triangle in Latin America and the Caribbean, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. Lithium is so critical in, of course, the global supply chain for semiconductors and data centers needed to power AI. Taiwanese companies should consider investing more in those 3 countries in particular. And last but certainly not least is develop an even more robust public diplomacy strategy. This is a little bit about the kettle. What's it called? The kettle calling the pot calling the kettle black, right? Because I think the U.S. also needs to do a better job at public diplomacy. But Taiwan really deserves credit for being a stalwart partner for its diplomatic allies. It provides humanitarian help, development assistance, trade and investment. But all too often, those accomplishments really don't get as widely known or widely reported on in the media. And so I think if the ICDF, if the OIDC, and other entities really spend more resources on engaging with the local media, making sure to get op-eds out in local newspapers to really showcase all the good that Taiwan does for the people in those diplomatic allies, I think that will really go a long way. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Leland. Fantastic. We will now turn to our last speaker. Teresa Winter is Policy Advisor for Security and Defense Policy at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. And she previously worked for Lockheed Martin, focusing on government relations, nuclear sharing issues, and missile defense. Many of you may know that Taiwan has a whole of society defense concept that is in very nascent stages of development. And there is a nascent civil defense program. It is being developed by the government, but also there is a bottom-up effort by some civil defense organizations coming from sort of civil society to provide some expertise to individuals in Taiwan in the event of a crisis, not only, of course, potential military conflict, but also natural disasters. So this is a really emerging topic. I'm really pleased that Teresa chose to write about it. And her paper is titled, "Not Just an Army of Civilian Warriors, Taiwan Should Bolster Deterrence by Investing in Civil Defense." So over to you, Teresa.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. And also from my side, thank you very much to all of you. Yeah, also for me, the TUPP program was really eye-opening. And yeah, let's see if how much that changes our career paths as well at some point or another. So thank you very much, Bonnie. You said already that I work for the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. Just for a very brief explanation, maybe it's a political foundation that is close to one of the political parties in Germany, and does a lot of public education in Germany and has many offices abroad. And as a maybe small and not so unimportant fun fact, we're the only political foundation in Germany that does have an office in Taipei and Taiwan. Our work there, though, focuses much more, of course, on something like democracy, innovation, civic participation, media literacy training, etc. And we do a lot of actually lessons learned on both ends. And that office is doing a tremendous effort in bringing a lot of learnings back to Germany in our offices here. So yes, I wanted to look at civil defense, as Bonnie said, and quite frankly, and to be honest with all of you that I can see and everybody who's listening in, it wasn't as easy to look into the civil defense aspect. One of my reasons why I wanted to do that is because, and Alicia, you alluded to that, the realization, of course, of many European countries, and for others more than, Germany has been for sure one of the countries waking up quite harshly to other realities that others have realized much more before. But realizing that there is war as a tool of, statecraft, and that's something we really have to focus much more in deterrence and defense. We started in Germany, quite frankly, to look at military deterrence and defense and how do we invest more, how do we spend more. And at some point, of course, then you start to think more in this whole of government, whole of society. And Bonnie, you said that Taiwan is looking at that concept, and there's a lot of other European countries that looked into total defense concepts, such as the Nordics. You have that in Lithuania, Latvia, and Sweden, Estonia, for various reasons in different ways. And even Germany, being slow to everything, it seems, started to do that. And I used the TUPP program in all honesty, because I read about a few trainings by Kuma Academy first, and then Bonnie, you brought Forward Alliance to my attention. So I used the trip that we did to really focus on talking to these two organizations and figure out how they came about. And I was surprised and really positively impressed by the civil society and grassroots initiative that they both explained in their various ways. And then I did, of course, my own research and further interviews, trying to figure out how that came about. And so my finding is that although, and we discussed that civil defense has been in concepts for the past century, also in Taiwan, in several government documents, you will find civil defense dating back to Japanese colonial times and later on. And then at some point you think, okay, so why do we still think that it's in the nascent state, or why is it not evolving somehow? And so similar to every other country that I've looked into, Germany is one of the great examples, because I can say that. We have a lot of concepts, a lot of the Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Defense also in times has concepts talking about civil defense, but then it doesn't come into fruition. And in Taiwan, there's a lot of grassroots initiatives such as Kuma Academy or Forward Alliance. There's some self-training groups that are really local groups that spread all across the island that offer weekend trainings, afternoon trainings, after work trainings, that is really privately funded, mostly supported, of course, by the political level at some points, but it's mainly really a grassroots initiatives. And I wanted to see how that translates into collaboration with the Ministry of Defense or the military, and how that translates into initiatives that are undertaken in the Ministry of Interior and the National Police Agency, for example. And I stumbled across different numbers, so I'm very happy to be contested here as well. Because one of the first numbers I saw is like there's 420,000 registered civil defense volunteers. And then I was like, okay, so what do you do with them? If you have a large number of registrations and you say this is our defense force, or civil defense force, if you will, how is that? Can you tell them tomorrow, come here, and this is the training going to look like? And from all of my interviews that I had and the reach that I try to do, it seems like there's a difference between official numbers, of course, and what you can actually achieve. And so there's two things I wanted to see. One is why do we actually have to talk about civil defense? And I won't go into detail here now, because we look into the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and one of the two most cited reasons why Ukraine so far managed to prevail is one, that Western support that the Russian regime highly underestimated, and the second one is civil resolve and the civil participation. And so I was wondering, how can we bolster that? And I was, with all my conversations I had, one of the reasons why it is difficult, and also Kuma Academy, that's why the title has this civil warrior analogy. It's because there's some citations of Kuma Shen and others saying that, civil warrior is kind of a vision where to go. So at the end of the day, if you have a scenario where you need to defend against an attack, an invasion, you do have civilians that are able to fend for themselves as well. That's contested, and understand that. And then there's many others that say, no, we actually decidedly want to be a civil unit only and focusing on disaster relief, on emergency relief, etc. And one of the things, and that's, I think, one of my main takeaways for me for the paper, is the civil-military relationship. Because I've realized that if we talk about the will to fight, the will to defend your country, and citing that as one of a deterrent factor also for anyone else, at least in Germany, and I felt that in Taiwan and all of our kind of conversations as well, if the civil-military relationship is strained, then the whole concept of defending yourself, fighting for your country, taking up arms if need be, is difficult. If you have a strained civil-military relationship, if you have any sort of crises, civil, how do you say that, trust in the military to actually do their job, or civil support, because actually, and that can also be a disaster and a natural hazard or anything, it can be critical that in such an instant, the civil side knows exactly what the military side is doing, and you go kind of, out of the way to have everybody do their job in a way. So long story short, there is a strained civil-military relationship in Taiwan, of course, due to history, due to the White Terror period, due to transitional justice, which is something that I didn't really look deeply into in my paper, how the transitional justice in Taiwan is occurring. But what I learned is that many military representatives are still come from or have training, have some sort of history from from the White Terror period in some form or other, and there has not really been a transitional justice of where there has been made somewhat, I don't know, for lack of better words, made peace between the civil side and the military, and there's a lot of distrust in the military's role in many things. And Germany has for other reasons and way worse, but a very strained civil-military relationship, and is improving that incrementally in the past years, realizing that if you don't increase that relationship, then if you want to spend more on defense, if you want to have your military be able to use civil infrastructure to cross the country for exercises, something as simple as that, then you will have a real problem, because that will hinder any progress you want to make. So in Germany, and there I touched a little bit on transitional justice, and it's difficult because Germany has a different history and had allies that took care of many of the progress in Germany. So a lot of the transitional justice has been put from outside, and Germany just had to accept it, and they didn't do it in the beginning, but they adapted to it and really quickly realized how important it is to understand the past and reckon with that in some way. And in the past 5 years, we had some initiatives, and they can be very simple. And I don't know if the Americans in the room can understand that, but for Germany, if there was an officer in uniform on the street 5 or 10 years ago, that was very difficult. Officers would say, I would never go out in a uniform. And so we started to do something like having free public transportation if you're in uniform. And all of a sudden, you see more people soldiers in uniform that you see publicly, because before that you could live in parts in Germany where you think we don't even have armed forces. Something as simple as that, and I have a few examples of that in the paper, all for saying there's ways to improve civil-military relationships that are crucial elements for civil defense. Civil defense does not mean military training like reserve, because that's a different angle that is also important. Civil defense means that you have civil society that has a good understanding of what a role is, that have a good understanding of locating themselves, of being able to do emergency relief, something like that, and may be able to support the military in such ways. So maybe just to sum it up a little bit, because I know that everybody of us could probably talk about the topic forever. The civil-military aspect for me was very important, also realizing for the Taiwan context how important that is in Taiwan. I think that there's many things that can be learned vice versa from Germany in that reckoning with the past, and Germany from the civil defense initiatives that are happening in Taiwan, actually, because they're really impressive. And I want to bring that back to Germany to show, how grassroots can really take the lead in a few things. And I was wondering if when you have civil defense initiatives working together with the military, you might be able to have a good transition and a form between very bureaucratic steps that you have in ministries of also the interior and the more creative ways of private organizations. And I leave it at that, but I wanted to say that this was a very exciting research also. So not only the top part of being 10 days really exposed and challenged, but also sitting back here and being like, okay, how can I bring this all together? So another thank you from my side.
Well, thank you so much, Teresa, for presenting on how so many similarities there are between Germany and Taiwan and how they can really learn from each other. I think so. We'll now be moving into the Q&A portion. So those of us in our audience, please feel free to send your comments either to contact@globaltaiwan.org or by replying to our Twitter or in our YouTube channel chat. So we welcome all of your questions. Please also provide your name and affiliation when you send in your question. All right, and I'll let Bonnie jump in with some moderator questions to start us off.
Great. Those are really excellent presentations and have stimulated lots of questions. And I think I will start where we left off with a question to Teresa. And I think it's really important that you've highlighted some of the history, the historical legacies that make civil-military relations in Taiwan really very, very difficult. And these civil society organizations that we visited and that you talked to separately, Kum Academy, Forward Alliance, are really doing, I think, path-breaking work in Taiwan. They are relatively new, and there appears to be a lot of interest in them from the public. Could you maybe suggest some concrete ways that these grassroots organizations could be connected more effectively with the military if the government in Taiwan chose to go that route? Because right now they are really quite separate. So is that something that you think maybe there are some initial steps that could be taken, ways that they could coordinate, and perhaps that would begin to build some trust between the public and the military, but could also initiate a process of greater integration?
Yeah, really excellent question also to challenge me, because I think that I always am like, okay, this has to be done. But I can start really, really easy. And I was wondering, or we were trying also to figure out how we do this here, because Germany now built up a homeland defense unit, and then trying to figure out how do you plug in the civilian side. And honestly, you could start with, even with small, almost like a game exercise. So unlike having everything institutionalized right away and creating laws and very strict procedures, I know that the military and the civil sides by themselves separately, they do wargaming. And also Kuma Kennedy told us that they did some sort of, I think they didn't call it wargaming, but something similar. So why not combine that and then just have the civil defense organizations challenge a military unit? I know that we've tried that here once or twice. I mean, this is of course something that you don't do very publicly, but to start off with joint exercises where you can see either the military even training the civilians in some of the, if you talk about geolocation and these aspects, or actually really having, I mean, some of these exercises are weekend exercises, so you probably have to figure out how you can bring the military to also say, good, this is a weekend activity, but why not have a joint weekend day of training that military and civil defense initiatives do together? That would be number one. Another one, which we do in Germany and is very high level and it should be broken down a lot, is for civil leaders, if you will. You can spend 1 week with a unit. So I spent 1 week with the German Navy, for example, and then you're put into a uniform and you do a few things with them. You don't have to be in uniform for that, but this 1 week that you spend as a civil leader or a civil person, and with that was tremendously informative. And some things like that, and it's not meant for recruitment. It's not meant for recruiting me to now join the Navy. It's really meant for creating understanding and having me go back to my environment and be much more open about that relationship and what I learned there, and understanding also how the military thinks in certain ways.
Those are great suggestions. Moving to Alicia, you talked about essentially how politics and elections within individual European countries often influence their relations with Taiwan in both positive and negative directions. And you cited Slovakia as an example of a CEE country that appears to be reversing course in its relations with Taiwan. Are there steps that can be taken by Taiwan or by individual countries that can make these relationships more enduring in the face of potential political shifts, which are, of course, inevitable in democracies?
Thank you, Bonnie. That's a great question. And I think it's also very, very timely, because I don't know whether you've followed what happened in Poland in the last couple of days, but our president, Andrzej Duda, he had a 5-day trip to Beijing, which was quite symptomatic of the kind of approach we're seeing now when it comes to cooperation with China. And I think the problem, both when it comes to Taiwan, engaging with Taiwan and building this solidarity, is the lack of Taiwan literacy and China literacy. And I'm not saying here that these issues are necessarily intertwined, but I think that if we do not see Taiwan and China literacy, at least to a certain level, then the way our decision makers in the context of elections, democratic elections, and the changes in government, they might not necessarily look at these countries or these entities in a way that reflects the reality on the ground. So it's very easy when you're dealing with, from the perspective of CEE countries, I think there is a trend that if you're dealing with an actor that is geographically far away, and historically has not been associated in the public debate with an immediate threat, for example, China, as opposed to Russia, it's very easy to project politicians' own fears, ambitions, aspirations, and so on. And when it comes to Taiwan, I think that there is a prevalent narrative that you are all very familiar with about Taiwan being, quote unquote, the most dangerous place on earth. And this kind of sensational language, I think it's oftentimes quite counterproductive when it comes to understanding what Taiwan really is, what Taiwanese society is, what kind of interest and different kind of communities we're seeing in Taiwan. And I think that what would be very beneficial in the long run would be to have more people-to-people engagement, for sure, that could translate into slowly building this Taiwan literacy in CEE countries, not only in CEE countries, throughout Europe, as a matter of fact. But as I said, Duda's trip to visit that just concluded, and the kind of optics surrounding it, a very, I would say, quite naive approach towards China, and the fact that he, in his rhetoric, he incorporated a lot of CCP slogans, a lot of China's basically slogans from the CCP's handbook of discourse power. And this was also picked up in the context of Taiwan, with Chinese media saying that Duda claimed that he supports one China principle. Xinhua commented on that, quoting that he allegedly said so. And because of the lack of Taiwan literacy and China literacy, this is not an issue in the Polish public debate. Nobody talks about it because nobody understands what the difference between one China principle and one China policy. That's the problem, and it's a lot of work at the level of civil society, academics, think tanks, but hopefully this is something worthwhile and worth pursuing.
Great. Turning now to Brian, you highlight in your paper the Global Cooperation Training Framework, which I see as a great success, a creative way to work together with Taiwan to help Taiwan bring its expertise to representatives from many other countries. And also to introduce, of course, many other countries to Taiwan and enable them to benefit from Taiwan's expertise. And there's a whole range of workshops that have been held now for many years. And so I'm wondering if you've thought more about ways that this can be made more effective, which like-minded countries could realistically become candidates to become full GCTF sponsors and members. And is there any possibility that, or ways of insulating GCTF from encountering pushback from the PRC, which is we have not seen so far, fortunately, and from insulating it from the kind of problems that you actually talked about in the Summit for Democracy. Obviously, two very, very different kinds of organizations, but the Summit for Democracy was initiated by the United States, and of course the GCTF was also, and neither of these include China, nor are they likely to in the future. But the Summit for Democracy already has challenges in including Taiwan's participation in ways that you suggest we should see. And maybe similar challenges could be faced down the road with the Global Cooperation Training Framework. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of partners going forward, some of the obvious ones would be Canada, the UK, European partners who may want to be involved, who share the same core values in terms of democracy, human rights, rule of law, gender issues. So I definitely think it's sort of the US's natural allies are the ones that I think we could expand on to build out this system. To your second point about how to insulate this program, I do think it's interesting that there has not been pushback that we've seen from the PRC, given the expansion of this program. I think that's in part because the participants, though they include government officials, are generally lower level, and also because of the issues that are being discussed, whether it's combating gender-based violence or attacking disinformation, go to less of the security side of things and focuses more on the substance, and always involves civil society and civil actors. And I think by having the workshops formulated in that way, it's not necessarily seen as a threat. And I don't think it should be. And I think that's one challenge that the United States has to keep in mind about Taiwan more generally, is that we should stop looking at Taiwan always through the lens of US-China competition or the US-China relationship, because Taiwan has its own values and own attributes that the United States should engage in outside of the security and economic dimensions. So when it comes to democracy, human rights, I think that's where the focus, by staying on those values, is less about trying to, push out the PRC and bring in Taiwan, and instead just really leveraging the expertise that Taiwan has. And I think Congress just needs to be conscious of that. The State Department, as it goes about setting out these workshops, has to be conscious about how they frame it, to make sure that it's successful and can be built out.
Great. Leland, there is a debate about the importance of Taiwan retaining its diplomatic allies, including in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also, of course, in the Pacific Islands. I wonder if you could comment on whether you think for Taiwan it is important for them to retain their remaining 12 diplomatic allies. And putting on your former hat as a diplomat, what is the U.S. role, if any, in helping Taiwan to preserve those diplomatic relationships with countries in Latin America?
Well, thanks, Bonnie. I mean, I think it's absolutely crucial to maintain the remaining diplomatic partners, if not for the simple but profound fact that still having diplomatic partners means that Taiwan still maintains its legitimacy as a sovereign state, and also has allies to advocate for Taiwan in various international fora. I think the fewer and fewer diplomatic allies formal diplomatic allies it has, then the fewer and fewer sort of countries in those international fora will actually support its priorities in international contexts. So I think it's absolutely crucial, absolutely important. To your point about what the U.S. can really do, I do want to say that the U.S. is thinking more innovatively about this. I'll give you an example. In February of this year, the ICDF and the US DFC, right, Development Finance Corporation, they signed an agreement in order to collaborate on advancing private sector investment, right? Not just in the Western Hemisphere, but also in the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere. The ICDF and USAID are working together on jointly funding projects worldwide. An example of that is small business development centers in Paraguay. Just, I think, a month or two ago, they inked an agreement on climate resilience projects in the Eastern Caribbean, right, where 3 Taiwanese diplomatic allies still are. So I think those are great initiatives. I think that going forward, both the USAID and the DFC should definitely prioritize speed in implementing those kinds of joint projects so that they can actually have some specific wins, so that they can boast some of those accomplishments. I also think that the U.S. various agencies should consider working with other Taiwanese agencies, not just the ICDF, right? Like I mentioned before, the OIDC, Overseas Investment Development Corporation, is also a potential key partner. The Central American Trade Organization, also a potential key partner, and of course NGOs, making sure that U.S. and Taiwanese NGOs can really continue to collaborate. Last thing I'll say there is there also needs to be an increase in really the on-the-ground collaboration and cooperation between diplomats from the U.S. and Taiwan. This sounds very simple, very straightforward, but in practice, it's actually kind of hard. Just to give you an example, it's only quite recently where the U.S. Embassy for Barbados in the Eastern Caribbean is now collaborating with the Taiwan embassies in St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It takes an actual conscious effort for a political officer or a public diplomacy officer on his or her trip to one of those islands to also meet with their Taiwanese counterparts, right? And actually game out, no kidding, joint strategies on jointly announcing common projects together, or making sure that the ambassador for the U.S. in that region and the Taiwanese counterpart are working together, or that the Taiwanese partners are invited to U.S. organized events. These are, again, small, kind of straightforward, but also very necessary steps that we can take in order to boost the common collaboration between the U.S. and Taiwan.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of those great responses to Bonnie's questions. We don't have any audience questions right now, so I will use my own moderator prerogative to ask some questions of my own. So the first question I have is for Alicia and for Leland. I noticed that you were talking about Taiwan's utility as an economic partner. And I know that when we were on our trip during TUPP, I think there were some people that were kind of lamenting that each country wants its own semiconductor plant. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of the areas of cooperation in terms of economics and, if not semiconductors, then what are some other things that Taiwan and these countries can collaborate on? And would there be a huge level of disappointment if they're not able to collaborate in the semiconductor industry? Maybe I'll let Alicia go first since Leland just spoke, so we'll give him a little bit of a chance to rest for a little bit.
Thank you, Adrienne. That's a great question. I think that in big picture terms, what we want to avoid is a repetition of what in the CEE region some people call China fatigue. Right now, we're coming from over a decade of quite intense engagement, economic engagement with China. The region was famous for creating this platform called 16+1, 17+1, or now 14+1, depending on the number of countries that cooperate with China, a special platform for cooperation that for many years was promoted by both Beijing and the regional countries as this amazing vehicle for attracting Chinese investment, and the political expectations at some point were very, very high. But then there was a mismatch between the expectations and the reality. And the mismatch was, I think, because of both the elevated, overblown ambitions of CE countries to attract this Chinese investment, but also because of China's own lack of understanding of the region. And now, if we want to avoid a similar dynamic happening with Taiwan, because many people, and I'm not a proponent of comparing like China and Taiwan, like obviously like the potential and the sectors that we could cooperate in are very, very different. But I'm just talking about the way it is often imagined in the public debate that we have cooperation with China and or cooperation with Taiwan. And now, because we're seeing a lot of sympathy towards Taiwan building up in some countries in this region, there's also a risk that these political expectations and sympathy might also be a little bit exaggerated and create what then was called China fatigue now could turn into Taiwan fatigue. And we don't want that to happen. So we really have to have very clear understanding of what the needs are on our end. And by our, I mean some CE countries that are willing to engage more robustly with Taiwan, but then also on Taiwan's part to understand the local dynamics. And that, for example, obviously, we are not going to get one TSMC fab each in any of the European countries, but maybe more to focus on looking for convergences between smaller enterprises in specific sectors. And that's what we've seen, for example, in cooperation between Taiwan and Lithuania. So more sector specific, based on facts based, and cooperation also between different entities that then have with officials providing a platform for business to actually be able to talk to one another, not necessarily creating this overblown political narratives about our ability to invest large-scale semiconductor investment, because that's just unrealistic and might in the end turn against us or our economic interests and our political expectations and sympathy towards Taiwan.
Yeah, I think from the Latin American and Caribbean context, I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of not necessarily semiconductor, but semiconductor adjacent industries. So in my conversation with the Taiwan rep from the trade office, he mentioned how a Taiwanese company that builds the printed circuit boards, right, for microchips, set up shop right on the Arizona-Mexico border. Why? Because obviously they're anticipating the eventual completion of the fab that TSMC is going to complete in Arizona, right? And so you're seeing that sort of happening now in anticipation of more and more of semiconductor production happening in the Western Hemisphere, the nearshoring, and various countries sort of jockeying to play some sort of piece in that supply chain. I mentioned before that Costa Rica and Panama have become key nodes in that. The State Department is already working with those two countries for feasibility studies on how do we create advanced packaging, right? Advanced packaging of semiconductors, or advanced manufacturing in those two countries as well. Taiwan would be a great partner in helping both Costa Rica and Panama think through that now, right? And I do believe that that is already happening, but on a more low-key area. The last thing I'll mention is that, similar to what Alicia had said before, how there seems to be this viewpoint of Taiwan as the most dangerous, place on earth, and there also seems to be a lag in the perception of Taiwan versus China in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? Where people still very much view the PRC as its growth is inevitable. That's where all the economic drive is and future is, and so we need to hitch our horse to that cart, or our cart to that horse now. And I think that is changing. I think with the domestic headwinds, economic headwinds that mainland China is facing, right? Whether it be the housing bubble, the growing debt amongst provincial and municipal governments, the decrease in foreign direct investment, the fact that various Western companies are now diversifying their supply chains. So China plus, right? So Vietnam into India and elsewhere. Mexico, of course, has been a huge beneficiary of that. And so that perception is changing. And I think that the image of Taiwan is really increasing in the region as well. And so I think that's a golden opportunity for really Taiwan to take advantage of that narrative shift and to go on the offensive and to say, listen, if you want to develop the workforce of the future in AI, in cybersecurity, we can organize a series of GCTFs, bringing Brian into this, in order to help with that, right? Can we bring delegations either to Taiwan or vice versa in order to help to boost and train the workforce of the future in those kinds of areas? Again, these things are happening slowly, but I think they need to be happening much faster, and Taiwan has a golden opportunity to do it.
Yeah, thank you so much for indulging my curiosity in both of those areas and questions. So we have one question now from Joshua Stone from German Marshall Fund. And he asked, a bit basic, but have Taiwan's diplomatic partners been tapped for GCTF events in the past? So I guess this will go mostly to you, Brian. And I think we will have maybe time for one more question after that, possibly. So we'll see if we get another question after that. Remember to please tweet us or send it in the YouTube chat or email us. And yeah, thank you very much. Brian.
Yeah, great question, Joshua. Yes, the answer is yes, particularly when it comes to Western Hemisphere GCTF events. They have primarily been with partners who still have diplomatic ties to Taiwan. Separately, they have done more regional events as well, and so that includes a broader grouping. So just a few months ago, they hosted an event on democratic resilience against disinformation, bringing in experts on cyber strategies that incorporate democratic elements, and that was for specific nations. So that was an example of them staying local as well. So I think that is one area where GCTF should try to build and move out of the historic focus that Taiwan has had when it's engaging in the world is sticking with its diplomatic allies. As Leland said, that's important for Taiwan to protect those relationships. But I think going forward, there's going to be huge value in broadening their engagement.
All right, yeah, thank you so much. I think we don't have any more questions, so just if there are any comments you would like to make to each other about your particular statements, or if not, then I do have one more question that I could ask. Does anybody want to ask any questions to your fellow panelists? Okay, all right, I'll use my moderator prerogative again to ask the final question. So I just wanted to know quickly, maybe because we just have 5 minutes left, but if each of you could just talk about something that you really found surprising from the TUPP trip, which kind of counteracted maybe some of what you had read about Taiwan in the past, and something that really stood out to you as a learning experience from TUPP.
All right,
I'll
we're going to call on someone. Brian,
I can
go.
start. Yeah, so one thing that I found interesting was the interest in U.S. funding for Ukraine. I think that was a point raised by so many officials we spoke to, so many questions about whether or not the United States was going to fund Ukraine. And that just shows you that Taiwan is looking very broadly about what the United States is doing with its partners and allies. And I think that was a main takeaway for me as I do my work in foreign policy more generally, is that Taiwan and others are really looking at what we're doing in other countries, and that sends a signal to our allies and partners.
That's a great point. And Taiwan certainly sees Ukraine and the outcome of the war as quite really existential for its own security. And that is something that I think was underscored by so many of the people we met with in Taipei. Alicia?
I think that for me, one of the most fascinating things was to see how the domestic internal political divisions were playing out, and how different political actors that we talked to or listened to were referring to or interpreting the same problems. And I've heard obviously about Taiwan's vibrant democracy before visiting, but it was much more lively than I would have imagined before actually visiting Taiwan. So I really enjoyed it. It was very, very interesting.
Teresa?
Yeah, for me, I have to say that everything was new, and it was a completely new environment. What I found the most astonishing was the knowledge every group that we met had on various European countries. I mean, the US for sure, that's out of the question. But even like for many European countries, no matter how small or big. And seriously, I mean, this is due to, of course, a lot of reasons, but the strong foreign policy interest, not only from the government side, but from a lot of civil organizations that we also met.
Leland?
The political polarization, which, given the fact that we're going to have our own political debate tonight here in the U.S., that shouldn't be surprising for Americans, but certainly the political polarization between DPP and KMT and TPP was definitely surprising, especially given the violence that then happened just a few weeks ago. Yeah.
I want to thank all of you for joining the panel today. And since the TUPP program is focused on encouraging young professionals to bring Taiwan into their own work, I'm really delighted that all of you continue to think about, do research, and work on Taiwan. And you've contributed to the success of the TUPP program. So I hope you will share your experiences with others. we will be opening up applications later this year for TUPP next year, since we have received more funding. And again, we will likely go to Taiwan and, of course, start in Washington, D.C., likely conduct the program again in February of next year. I am grateful to the Global Taiwan Institute for being a partner in this project, and also want to thank the Henry Luce Foundation for its support, and the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm really excited that we were able to talk again. I was able to hear all of your perspectives, and I'm really looking forward to the papers coming out next month and being able to read all the other papers from our other participants who did not join us today. So thank you again, everyone, and I'm glad that we are ending just on time, because I know that several of you have things after this as well. So thank you so much, and yeah, until next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.